Good morning and welcome to the latest in the Skills at Scale webinar series. This is part 2, entitled The Challenges of Entering the AI Market, a European Perspective. And we have a great selection of speakers and panelists this morning. So we're just going to give people a few minutes to, or a few seconds rather, to join. So bear with us for a moment and we will start in a minute. Thank you very much. So people are just joining us now, and we will kick off in a minute or two. Okay, good morning, and thank you everybody for joining us on this rather fine and mild November morning, where we'll be talking about the challenges of entering the AI market with a European perspective. So I'm just going to share a screen for our agenda this morning. I'll be giving a welcome and introduction. My name is Paul Hearns, and I've been a journalist and commentator around ICT for more than 20 years. So we're going to kick off this morning with a presentation from Anthony Macaulay, who is AI Program Manager with Technology Ireland, ICT SkillNet. And Anthony is going to talk about awareness, adoption, and the impact of artificial intelligence. So Anthony is not just the AI Network Manager for SkillNet. He's a former Head of Research and Innovation at Fujitsu Ireland and Chair of the Industry Advisory Board for the National Masters in Artificial Intelligence, delivered by Limerick University. Then we're going to have a conversation with Dervla Mullen from Newswhip. So Dervla is the Chief Product Officer and a board member with Newswhip, and she has broad experience in product development in particular, so is going to provide a really good context in terms of AI within product development and the unique offering of Newswhip as well. So then we're going to get an Irish insight from Brendan Bonner of the IDA. So Brendan is Chief Technologist in Technology, Content and Business Services for IDA. So more than 25 years experience in technology innovation, and a recent graduate from the AI Masters as well. So Brendan is an advisor on the development of Ireland's National AI Strategy too, and also Disruptive Technology and the Innovation Fund. So then we're going to have financial insights from Paul Swift, who's Head of Technology Sector for Business Banking with Bank of Ireland. And Paul is going to give us a very general kind of assessment of readiness for organizations looking to finance rounding for these kinds of technologies and projects. So then we're going to go to a discussion panel, and all of our participants this morning are going to join us for that. And if you look to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A, poll, and a chat function. There's also a raise hand option there. So we're going to be running a couple of polls this morning as well, get you to do some work for us too, and we'll be sharing insights from those as we go. So any questions you might have, please put them in the Q&A, and all the panelists have access to that, and I'll be taking questions from that and addressing them to the panelists. If you have any insights or anything that you would like to share with the panelists, you can use the chat function. So if there's references, sources, anything you'd like to share, you can pop those in there. If you wish to come on mic or on camera, you can raise hand, and our producer Sarah can bring you in directly, and you can address something to the panel. So please do use the opportunities at your disposal there, Q&A, chat, and raise hand. We would love to hear from you, and certainly from our last session, there was quite a bit of interest in there. So just in terms of framing the conversation this morning, a recent survey from the European Union gauging use of technologies based around artificial intelligence found that there was almost universal awareness within the business environment. However, levels of adoption are low, and while those projects that lead to impact are lower again. So some organizations suffer from what McKinsey has referred to as pilot purgatory, where proof of concepts never really reach production. So the purpose of this series, the power of applied intelligence, aims to provide a no-nonsense, practical and pragmatic level of advice to business. and to business leaders in particular, to improve understanding of artificial intelligence, demonstrate where growth markets exist and where investment is taking place, but also the sectors of interest and the applications which are delivering bottom line return on investment. So the aim is to pack the next 60 minutes or so with expert advice and guidance to assist your adoption and to enable you to deliver AI with impact. So this is the second in the webinar series, and the European perspective is particularly important. So we're hoping to determine how best to improve the awareness and the AI adoption and ultimately business impact. So again, to give us that kind of broad perspective, awareness, adoption and impact of AI, I'll get Anthony to share his screen and to begin. So thank you very much, Anthony.
Morning, everybody. I'm hoping if you can just give me a thumbs up there, Paul, that you can see that.
I can see that, certainly. It's in edit mode.
Okay. As Paul has said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to motivate the discussion with Paul, Brendan and Dervla around looking at a European perspective of what's happening with respect to AI. But before I do that, I just wanted to give people a 1-minute update. The last webinar, I talked about our Skills at Scale pilot. The whole idea here being the Technology Ireland ICT SkillNet are introducing programs and frameworks to close the skills gap around artificial intelligence. Skills at Scale is part of that. We've introduced it across 10 pathways, 5 categories. You can see the categories on the screen there. We launched it on Monday at 4 p.m. It runs for 4 weeks. It's targeting business and technology leaders. We hoped to get maybe 10 to 15 companies, maybe get 30 to 40 people. It's simply just about testing the platform, making sure the content, the quality is there. And we ended up with over 100, well, just 100 and 40 companies. So it's been extremely popular. And I'll keep you up to date in terms of how we progress with that. The findings, it'll be part of a bigger endeavor next year, which will look at increasing the pathways around the technical, but also very much around business, product development, project management, strategy, and so on. So that's just a little update for you. We've successfully launched it. It's underway. And as I said, as we identify particular findings, I'll introduce them as part of the webinars. So the motivation for the webinar today is this document, or this document that was issued by the European Union around, they did a survey of enterprises right across Europe, the European 27 plus Norway, Iceland and the UK. It was done by Ipsos Mori. You might know them from opinion polling, looking at party political, but for this purpose, it was looking at AI adoption. And the big finding, 78% of organizations know what the term AI means, which is great. The challenge is adoption. And what we're seeing is that maybe 42% of organizations, which is quite significant, have now adapted at least one technology. A much lower number, around 14% in Ireland have adopted 2 technologies. And then 18% are saying that they're going to adopt AI over the next 2 years. It's around 13%. Now, as I go through this, I won't call out all the percentages for Ireland, but you can see the equivalent that was taken from an Irish perspective. But what I do want to talk about are some of the challenges that were discussed as part of the document, and also give you some practical strategies, mitigations. I don't want to just explain the water that we're drowning in. I want to give you some advice and guidance, and then we can open it out as we discuss it with the panel in terms of how they are reflected in an Irish context. 3 I'm going to look at in particular: skills, finance and regulation, typically because they're the ones that people talk about the most. In terms of skills, and this is no surprise to anyone, over 57% of people saying we can't hire the right skills, and 45% lack existing skills within their own cohort. On the right here, what you're seeing is a study that was done by the World Economic Forum. It was done by PwC globally, and again, it resonates that skills gaps in the labor market, the inability to identify specialized skills, but also a particular challenge around leadership and the types of leadership required within organizations to understand the value proposition, the strategy that needs to be put in place, how do you develop products and so on. So this is not a technology phenomenon, it's also a business phenomenon. And when you look at the particular types of roles, what are the types of roles in organizations? You can see them down here. Obviously, artificial intelligence, data science, data engineering, and so on. But what's more important is, yes, technology, but as I'm saying, these business type roles and this type of aptitude for artificial intelligence, and that's what they looked at here. And it's looking at analytical thinking, active learning, complex problem solving. So it's about how do you formulate a strategy? How do you formulate problems? How do you develop models? How do you apply it to a business area? Yes, it's technology, but it's also this aptitude for artificial intelligence and how you deliver. And in terms of that, two strategies or approaches that I just wanted to draw your attention to in terms of addressing the skills gap that I found quite useful. One is from McKinsey, that's the one on the left here. And what they've come up with is what they call a skills transformation approach. And it's broken up into three areas: to scout, to shape, and to shift. And scouting is typically looking at what are the skills demands you have within your organization. These are looking at larger organizations, but I think the same applies. The same model and strategy applies to all types of organizations, looking at the demand for them and then analyzing what are the skills that we need to close those gaps. Then shaping a strategy in order to address them. So looking at what are the portfolio of skills that we need, and then tailored learning programs. And that's what we're trying to do with the skills at scale. What a lot of business people are saying is they know the skills that they need, but it's going out to the market and find ready-made solutions, almost non-think, just give us them, let us put our people through them. And that's what the skills at scale approach is doing. It's identifying skills pathways that are in demand. Business leaders can put people on those and develop the skills that are needed. And that's what that shift piece is about, is within organizations, how do you do that? Do they develop a skills hub to undertake the skills transformation? But it's all about how do we imagine the workforce and how do we then build an infrastructure to address that. On the right here, this was from Gartner, and it's very important because if you look at these intersections here, what they're talking about are roles within the organization that are going to be very important, what they call skills adjacencies. And what skills adjacencies are those roles where there are interaction between domains within the organization. I spent a lot of time as what I would call a business translator myself. You're sitting, running an AI function, and you have to deal with other people in the organization. You have to translate those ideas into meaningful concepts for a business audience. And therefore, business translators, people who understand the technology, can take it, can put it into business language, demonstrate the value proposition, extremely important. Process engineer as well. As AI takes hold, just like any other technology, processes will change. Process engineers need to talk to business audiences. They need to talk to a technical audience to determine and show how the organization needs to restructure itself. So two strategies, one looking at providing particular types of skills, but also looking at skills adjacencies, building up particular types of expertise within the organization to make AI a reality. The second area then is the investment needed. The cost of adoption can be prohibitive. Over 52% saying that the cost of adoption is on their radar, but also, adapting processes, organizational processes, and then how do we get our hands on some maybe external funding in order to facilitate reducing the total cost of ownership. Now, what I've done on the right here is I've just looked at a typical machine learning operation across 5 categories, just to give you an idea, because people are saying, well, what are all these costs? What are the resources? What are the processes? What are the types of infrastructure? And what I have here are the types of resourcing that's needed. So you have product owners, you're going to have data scientists who are looking at the problem at hand. What data are we going to need? What types of models? A domain expert in the area that's going to inform that. That's absolutely critical, important. You'll see it in banking, you see it in healthcare. They have to inform the development of those models. Data engineers then looking at bringing that into a production environment. Machine learning engineers making sure that the models are not drifting, and so on. So lots of resources that need to be considered right across the ML ops continuum. There's then processes and practices that need to be put in place. The whole area of monitoring and drift to make sure that the algorithm remains true to itself. I'll talk about some problems in relation to that. Governance, Data governance, extremely important, looking at quality of data, data bias. Product development, the whole area of AI product development. Now, how do you develop a product, something that maybe Deborah can talk about, because probably it's something Newswhip would look at particularly. But then infrastructure, how do you outsource? How do you insource? What type of tooling and so on? So they're the types of costs, when we're talking about cost of adoption, that they're the types of areas that you need to consider. It's probably no different to any other type of development, but there they are. So how do you address them? And one of the main recommendations is an investment plan. And that's looking at a strategy around your investment in AI. What's the value proposition? How are you going to structure your resourcing and your processes to make sure that that business strategy becomes real? Looking at use cases, absolutely essentially important. Business use cases, they motivate the discussion, they demonstrate the value. Then you're framing your skills strategy, looking at a sourcing strategy. And I'm not talking about just sourcing of skills. I'm talking about how do you, when you're in terms of building your application, are you going to insource? Are you going to outsource? Or what combination? Are you going to collaborate, partner, and so on, to reduce the burden of maybe skills upskilling in the short term as you come to terms with AI, and then that sourcing strategy may change. Tooling solutions, and then looking at building funding models. So building these various instruments into that to reduce that total cost of ownership, and then getting some expert advice, bringing in peers to review this, assess it, and determine whether it's valid. So bringing in people who are in the AI space that have done it before and can obviously give you advice and guidance. On the right, then, I've identified some funding options. I'm not going to go into all these, but I actually did a LinkedIn post recently. European finance, there's a lot of it, absolutely. It is a challenge. Some of it can be bureaucratic, some of it can be cumbersome and administrative, but once you get used to it and you apply for it and you have a process in place, it becomes less burdensome and easier to apply for. And you need to get an understanding of the various instruments and what they can do. The other piece of intelligence I gathered in preparing for this is Bank of Ireland. Just happens to be, I'm not promoting Bank of Ireland or any of the other banking institutes, just happened to be one identified, and Paul is here today. But looking at funding, the whole gamut of funding grants, I've put the link. It really is, it's exhaustive, it's huge. And when you see it, it's unbelievable in terms of the various grants and funds that are out there that people can put their hands on. And then a book I would recommend from BDO, I know Derek Henry well. It's an extremely good book. It's an absolute encyclopedia of the different instruments that are out there, tax incentives, sources of funding within the Irish market. Also look at venturing, but extremely good book. If you can get your hands on it, do so. Andrew Borg and Derek Henry over at BDO. Again, I've put that in the references of this, so if you want to get it, the references there and the link. The last challenge then is the whole area of reputation and regulation. And this is a big one. I mean, 33% are saying that there's strict standards for data exchange. There needs to be. They're worried about reputational damage. If we put AI in place and it goes wrong, what's the consequence? And then there is a recognition that we need new laws, new regulations. So on the right, I've broken it up into the reputation piece and the regulation piece. Reputation, there's been two items in the news recently. One around Zillow. Zillow is a real estate, digital real estate company in the US. They have an algorithm that's called ScAIe, and ScAIe values homes. And what they did was they delivered a service where they offered people to buy homes, and they used this estimate, which is up to now they've believed has been extremely accurate, to buy homes. And what they were doing was they ended up with 27,000 homes that they bought in the US. They could only sell 17 because the algorithm overestimated the value of the homes. Now, why did it happen? It happened because it was within the pandemic. There was lots of other parameters that was impacting the value of homes. The parameter, the algorithm wasn't taking account of that, and they were left with a £365 million loss, and they laid off staff. So the whole area of governance, making sure there's no drift in those algorithms, absolutely critically important. When it goes wrong, it could be quite catastrophic. Another one is Ask Delphi. And Ask Delphi, you can put moral questions to it. You can see it here describing the UK and the US as good countries, France as nice, Iran as bad. But the problem here is that the algorithm just takes time to learn. The algorithm is not deliberately being racist. It just takes time for it to learn. And what they've now put is a big disclaimer up on this thing, because people are going in asking all sorts of questions. But you can try it, and actually it's getting much, much better as it becomes more trained, as it becomes more sophisticated. The other area then is regulation. And what's going to happen in Europe is that European regulation will come in around artificial intelligence. It's going to identify systems by risk. You can see the 4 levels of risk down here. It's around prohibitive systems. Prohibitive systems are systems that are AI is being used for subliminal messaging. So years ago, if you'd gone into see a movie and they put cuts of Coca-Cola, you weren't able to see the cuts, but you'd see maybe they'd cut it into the video. You'd hide the heat in the cinema. You'd get hot. You'd feel, I need to have a drink. That type of thing. Putting salt in and making you feel thirsty. But things like that is manipulating people, they're prohibited. Then there's high risk systems that are out there that are delivering value, but you need to be careful. Facial recognition systems, not being racist, making sure that systems that are for traffic control, obviously it's very important. If it goes wrong, it could be catastrophic. Energy, selection of candidates for job, making sure they're not biased, not gender biased, not age biased, and so on. So the new regulation is going to be very much around systems risk. So I've put the two on side by side here in terms of the AI regulation. As I said, the new regulations coming in from Europe, it's around 2 particular areas, very much having the citizen at the center of this. And it's around protecting personal data, making sure the data remains private, but also liability. Now, this is going to be one that is going to take a lot of thought. Autonomous vehicles, somebody's run down, who's to blame? Is it the manufacturer's the car? Is it the person who's developed the algorithm? Those type of questions are going to need to be assessed and determined. So what's the advice? This will come in the second half of 2022. That's the transition period, and then it comes into force in 2024. And the advice is read the legislation. The legislation is now out there. Seek advice, bring in some maybe legal expertise to assess it, but also look at a responsible framework. And that's what I have on the right-hand side here. By the way, I've included in the presentation a little overview that was done by Arthur Cox of the new regulation. You can read that. It gives a nice understanding of it in terms of the key instruments that are going to be within it. So I'd recommend that you read that. But in terms of frameworks, there's lots of types of frameworks. I picked one from Forbes because it picks the 6 main areas that are typically covered, making sure that systems are fair, robust, reliable, private, accountable, that you're monitoring it, that you're making sure that there's not that drift, that it's transferable and explainable. That's key. Explainable AI, making sure that you can show a pathway of how results have been arrived at. As I said, I'm not endorsing any of these large multinationals, but they all have a responsible framework. If you're using Microsoft, if you're using Google, if you're using IBM, you can go in, look at those frameworks, and you can see them. Very, very good in some cases. And then finally, just looking at sectors, top use cases across the various sectors. Here they are. You can see them. Automated customer service, the likes of chatbots, quite familiar now, people going in, using it to offset the cost of service support. Diagnosis and treatment systems for healthcare. It's increasingly happening, interpreting data, looking at, particularly for cancer research, but other types of chronic illnesses and diseases, also telehealth, automatic claims processing, and so on. Supply chain management, a huge area, logistics and planning. Amazon use it quite effectively to identify what needs to be in stock in their particular location, reduces time to the customer. News and media, automated content solutions. And then in terms of IT companies, they're using it for smart networking, optimized infrastructure and monitoring. So it's right across the sectors. In terms of the sectors that are seeing the largest and most significant form of investment, yes, technology companies, but number one, finance, financial services, insure tech, wealth tech, and financial services in general, huge area, and probably the most effective in terms of implementing and integrating artificial intelligence. So that's it. As I said, to provoke the discussion, to give you an indication of some of the challenges, but also hopefully to give you some of the mitigations and strategies to address them. And Paul, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Some very interesting talking points there, and I think particularly around skill development and those kinds of challenges. But we'll move swiftly along there. Just a reminder that this session is being recorded, and we'll be making it available later. And I see a question there in terms of the slides. So generally, we would make a version of the slides available afterwards as reference as well. So we'll just move along, and I will invite Dervla on screen now. So Dervla is Chief Product Officer and board member with Newswhip. So welcome, and thank you very much for joining us, Dervla. If we could start really with just a little bit of background on the company, on Newswhip, on what you do, and then a little bit about your role in terms of product officer.
Sure. Thanks, Paul. So Newswhip is a media intelligence company. So we monitor all of the content that's being published in real time. That's across digital publishers like the New York Times or the Washington Post, but also on social media across Facebook, Reddit, Twitter. And really the use case we're trying to help is either newsrooms or communications professionals who need to understand what the public are interested in at any one time. If you're a newsroom, it could be because you want to decide what stories your journalists should cover that day. Or if you're a communications professional in a brand or a PR agency, it could be to see, are there any issues that are emerging that could provide either a threat or an opportunity to my brand. So if you think of a company like Amazon, on any given day, there's conversations about how they treat their employees, but there's conversations on their leadership and technology. And they want to know within seconds which stories are emerging, where are they emerging, and who's engaging with them and how, and then understand what's the key meaning of those conversations and the sentiment of those conversations so that they can react to those decisions. So that's what we help with. We're about 65 people based primarily in Dublin. I lead the product and engineering team. So we build this platform that needs to monitor all of this huge volume of content and then provide meaningful signals to our users so that they can interpret this without having to try and scan all of this data themselves.
So it's very much a force multiplier for people already, and taking what would have been traditional human skills and automating and combining, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in the old days, you used to have just the physical newspaper and you'd have clipping services, but the amount of content produced was arguably manageable, whereas now, obviously, the quantity of content being produced is at a scale that humans couldn't process. But then there's the huge opportunity of the additional analysis and patterns you can identify through technology that you couldn't, obviously, as a human as well.
Okay. And given you have a long role in terms of product development, how is AI different in terms of the way it's woven in as a technology to a product development cycle?
Yeah, well, I think there's both kind of similarities and differences. I think that Anthony touched on it. I think that sort of product mindset of focusing firstly on your user and the problem you're trying to solve for the user, and then exploring how you can create value for the user's needs are kind of traditional product philosophies that I think are really important to retain when it comes to AI. I think there sometimes can be AI projects that are just have already decided they want to deliver some new advanced AI, and they're not necessarily that aligned to the problem they're solving. So I'd still root it in that kind of user-centered design focus, but where it's very different is I think some of the enablers you need, in terms of the focus on the data as the kind of foundation and quality of everything. So if you aren't in a kind of a strong position from a data perspective as a company, I'd say pause and don't go any further until you've done that, because the AI can only work with the data it's got. And then those skills that Anthony mentioned in terms of there's quite specialist skills needed in terms of data engineering, data science, extra emphasis on infrastructure and potentially partners that could provide some of those AI services. And then there is a different way of delivering AI and managing AI. So there's new processes. So there's quite a change, even for a digital native company like Newswhip, where we're very, content and analysis focused, a very product driven culture. We've had to learn, how do you bring in new processes for managing projects? There's focuses on things like, how do you measure the quality of AI? Things like, precision and recall are metrics we wouldn't have typically had to worry about when we were developing standard software solutions. But, you need to know your AI will never deliver 100% accuracy. So you need to understand what's acceptable for my users. Then you need to invest in things like the operations side of any AI product you develop, in terms of maintaining models, but also those, I guess, those trustworthiness and ethical practices that Anthony talked about. You have to invest a lot in publishing, your data policies, being transparent about the metrics and the analysis your models are doing so that your users are informed, and make sure you've considered those key things like privacy, and reliability and security and all of those things. So there's, I guess, a mix of a lot of new dimensions, and the only way you can I guess, learn about those is learn from others and take small steps and begin the journey. But there's a lot of the foundations of just good product development and understanding your user and the market opportunity that you can't lose sight of either.
Okay, well, you've already made my job easier by touching on some of the key points there in terms of trustworthiness and how that's achieved through transparency. So I suppose if we just round off by taking the SME focus in particular. So in terms of an SME looking to engage on these, and we'd heard already about the McKinsey observation of pilot purgatory, where even sometimes a pilot or a proof of concept may not translate into business value. So from that perspective, say for smaller companies in particular, what do you think are the sort of key success factors that will allow them to transition successfully into business value?
Yeah, I think firstly they have to recognize this is a journey, and there will be some failure and there will be some pilots that don't go to production. I think if you go into the mindset of that every AI project will result in a production feature, you'll be disappointed. But I think there's ways as a small company you need to be able to do this in a lean way. I actually think small companies are more agile. They're often more in touch with their customer and the need they're trying to solve. So they probably focus their AI projects to have a better chance of delivering ROI than some of the bigger corporate projects can kind of become monsters. I also think small companies just have to be more outward looking. They need to pull in resources, pull in partners, leverage existing open source services and models, be very clear on the things you want to build yourself. They should really only be on the things where you've got some real unique advantage and unique data. But for a lot of the good kind of components of AI and machine learning or in NLP, there's great services you can get out there, and then avail of those resources that Anthony talked about. There's huge repositories for learning, for training of your own people. But there's also partners. We've worked with Cedar, we've worked with Adapt and Trinity. We're constantly involved with EI to see what extra support they can give us. So a small company has to recognize that they will never be able to invest in this if they go solo. So look to the market and to academia and anywhere, and the government everywhere they can to get help to accelerate that journey.
Okay, thank you very much. That's that's extremely informative, and as I said, you've already touched on some of the key points there. So we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much for that, and we'll come back to you for the panel. So I'm just going to call on our producer Sarah now to put up the first poll, and we will ask Brendan Bonner, the Chief Technologist in Technology, Content and Business Services with IDA, to come on now. Welcome, Brendan.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
Okay, well, just as people are interacting with the poll there, Brendan, we'll just get you to tell us a little bit specifically about your role. And again, I know you've done quite a bit around AI yourself in terms of education and everything. So maybe tell us a little bit about what IDA does around this, and maybe some of the specifics then in terms of your own engagements and what you look for, I suppose, in trying to support organizations here.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Well, IDA Ireland are, of course, the inward investment for FDI for Ireland. And what we try and do is create sustainable jobs in emerging technologies, plus also things that support industries that are already here, such as manufacturing, pharma, plus the huge ICT industry. So what my role is within the IDA is to work with companies and to try and see where they are on that journey of doing innovation, creating new roles, and seeing where it will sort of lead to globally. So we work very closely with both the multinationals in the HQs to try and see what their global strategies are for adapting new technology and scaling. And then we also work with the Irish ecosystem to make sure that we have a talent pool that's ready for meeting that demand. So that's working with ICT SkillNet, working with the universities, the SFI research ecosystem, plus the AI technology centers. And of course, we have this huge, and probably the biggest attractor is the huge pool of innovative SMEs and the technology and innovation hubs that are available. Because, you know, sharing information is really what's going to give the advantage to a multinational company who's trying to set up a base for scaling their global operations.
Okay, and in terms of sort of the different areas of activity and opportunity and areas to develop, what are the sort of areas of focus that you're looking for? So I suppose on the one hand, the areas of activities that are already there, and secondly, maybe the areas that you'd like to develop a bit more and promote.
Yeah, exactly. If you looked at Anthony's sheet earlier on, that showed the sectors where there's a focus area. So we do have some areas such as news aggregation, etc. That's very much a steadier growth, but it's really truly sort of like using the latest versions of NLP, and there's been quite a bit of success with Newswhip and other companies here. But what we look at is to see, again, what's the core competences of the companies so as we can bring them along a journey. So that's to be looking at what position they are. We engage with companies to see where they are on an innovation plus an AI adoption scorecard. Because if you take that overview, which is, am I ready to deploy a huge team responsible for ML ops, that will occasionally frighten companies and they may not be ready for that part of the journey. So we want to see where you are in terms of, are you looking for automation that is introducing RPA, chatbots, etc.? Are you trying to accelerate something? And then we have to start looking at the data that you have available. What are the alternative sources throughout Europe? And are there other companies who can provide that information and help you along so that you can make better decisions and make better predictions? And then if you're truly ready, then companies like Newswhip, again, they're ready to be sort of pushing the boundaries and really innovating. So they're well aware of what's involved on the software that's available. They're well aware of the obligations with regard to responsibility and ethics. But we can then assist them with sort of how you push those boundaries further. Again, the first thing is trying to establish where you are in that roadmap and be able to say, okay, this is where I need to get to in the short term, or where I'm going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's where we work very closely with companies to try and measure that and then make sure that they have the both the talent, the access to education and upskilling, whether it's business operations development or software. I think in the talent pool, we've recently been identified as one of the largest per capita for AI talent. And it really shows, though, if we have software engineers, they want to be able to push their own personal competences. And that's why you have programs such as the AI Masters.
Very good, very good. Well, in terms of the financial supports, because again, it was something that Anthony flagged in his presentation. What kinds of instruments are available, and sort of at what stages are they appropriate? Because there seems to be various levels of interest in terms of initial business awareness, early experimentation, and then that move from pilot to business value. Yeah, exactly. And the only way to escape pilot purgatory is really where you dip your toes in, where you're not really sure how to escape from it. And what we have is a number of instruments, both in-house and external. So you can, if you're trying to figure out where you're going to go next, you can partner with any of the research centers or technology centers who will give you guidance on how to go further with the data and to sort of pull you out of that to see how to get to the next steps in terms of scaling. Of course, our key drive is always to create jobs and to make sure that those jobs are sustainable. So between ourselves and Enterprise Ireland, we highly encourage internal upskilling and internal investment in your own RD&I journey, and there's direct levels of support of that. But of course, occasionally that's not always going to be available. So there are alternative ones. The Disruptive Technology Innovation Fund is a great instrument for being able to partner with SMEs, multinationals, and within the academic community to disrupt a certain portion of industry and to be able to produce new knowledge based on that. And of course, it has to always be commercial. But then you have the wider European ecosystem. So within Horizon Europe and the other new important projects of common European interest, there's a whole pool of calls there that are related to how we can use AI for the betterment of society, for making sure that we've got a stable European ecosystem. And so something that's very important as well is that the EU are changing the rules for what's called the exemption regulations, so that we can invest more in sustainable and infrastructure to support AI. And that aligns very closely with the recently published National AI Strategy, which proposes that we will have infrastructure supports, one-stop shops for helping companies along that journey so that they can engage directly and see where to go. Very good, very good. Okay, well, I'm just conscious of time, and we have to speak to Paul as well. But maybe just a final brief comment on the European Digital Innovation Hubs and the kind of supports that they might offer, and particularly, I suppose, the broader view that they might give a company embarking on this. Yeah, thanks. And that's exactly what we were talking about with the National AI Strategy. They propose to introduce one-stop shops, and CEDAR and Welcome have been very much exemplars in this. So they were the first European digital innovation hubs. The new series of them now, we've got 1 million allocated per year that's going to be matched by the government, so that we can have centres of excellence such as CEDAR. We've got the FMCI. We've got the smaller ones which are focused on industry-specific verticals such as Confirm and the AMC, which the IDA is opening towards the end of the year. They're all going to be places where you can go with your specific industry sector problem and then say, this is where I want to get to. Can you tell me where to go? And they will give you the tools, they will give you the competence if needed, and they will give you advice and supports. So all in all, it's going to be a great help once they all come online. Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Brendan. Unfortunately, we're pressed for time, so I'll leave it there. Just if we get Sarah to display the poll there, we'll just have a quick look at that. So the poll asked, which of the following is your preferred sourcing strategy for AI solutions? And we can see there a clear lead for partner or collaborate to build. So that's a very positive response there. But build solutions internally from the ground up and build buy off-the-shelf solutions are both strong there as well. So that's an interesting thing, I suppose. In certain instances, to protect intellectual property or a brand new idea, I suppose the more in-house solutions might be better. So thank you for that. So I'll just ask Paul Swift to come on camera now, and we will take the financial perspective. So Paul is head of technology sector with business banking in Bank of Ireland, and he's going to speak sort of generally in terms of assessing readiness and what's looked for generally as organizations go out to market and look for financing. So Paul, welcome, and thanks for joining us this morning.
Morning, Paul.
So again, just tell us a little bit about your role generally, and how you engage with companies and organizations, and tell us just a little bit about that kind of those initial conversations you might have.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Sorry, I suppose, Paul, first and foremost, I'm part of the sectors team. There's 7 of us currently in the team, and we cover everything from motor to retail to hospitality, food and drink and agri, etc. And there's myself as well. And I suppose we're all hired in from industry, and we kind of very much, I suppose, bring our own perspectives and bring that into the bank in terms of, what goes on in our industries. And to allude to what Anthony said earlier, we very much kind of translate what's going on in our sectors and bring it back into the bank. Obviously, we help the bank in terms of understanding and identifying risks, but also pointing out opportunities as well. So I suppose what my role is very much, I can cover over technology, media and telecoms. And I suppose when you're meeting companies, I suppose I've been doing this for a long time, really, in terms of assessing companies across different, roles down through the years. And I suppose you're always looking in terms of readiness. Well, we'd always look at, I suppose, first and foremost, you'd always look at kind of the quality of the promoters and in terms of the team itself. So you're looking really in terms of actually the experience of the leadership, the founders, have they, in terms of, I'm just talking out very broadly, right? In terms of actually the kind of type of people I meet every day. And you're looking at, like, if in terms of they're obviously looking to access debt, you're looking at, have they done it before? Have they had a business before? And then obviously what their track record was. So you kind of get a good understanding in terms of, the background, the skill sets, the kind of capability of the team. And then you're also looking then very much around the business itself. And I suppose there's the strategy, the plan, I suppose the direction of travel the business is aiming to go in. And obviously you're kind of all the while you're assessing that, seeing, I suppose, where, because a lot of the time the companies we meet, to the case in point, are building the AI technologies and they've found something that's quite unique and different, and it's a differentiator, but they're looking obviously to scale internationally. And so from that point of view, it's kind of looking at where they fit in the market, and if it's kind of a particular suite of products or if it's kind of something unique. So then obviously I would be also looking at something like their kind of, the revenue model as well. And like we're in an as a service economy now. And so every business is very much moving to kind of the as a service model. So, I mean, dare I say it's kind of still relatively early days, but I mean, for a lot of businesses, and you see even a lot of services businesses are also kind of going from what would have been kind of, a bundled, would have been in, kind of payment for services now into kind of bundling the services. So they kind of get people onto a recurring revenue model, and kind of obviously gives them the certainty and reduces kind of in terms of the project-based income. So that's another huge part for us in terms of the assessment. But very much then it gets into the kind of nuts and bolts of it, and then you're looking at things like for established businesses, because we're not a venture capital business, right? So we're kind of we're not we do invest in venture funds, and we have investment managers that do that for us over the last decade, but we're very much looking at kind of businesses that are established. And to that end, you're very much then looking at, does the audited accounts marry with what the story is. So that's when we kind of start unpacking that and getting a better understanding of, what the business is doing, how it's performing really. And things like security are important for a bank like us, in terms of, very much in terms of looking for that. And then again, you look at the overall in terms of, some people would have, like, to give you an example, I'm dealing with a business at the moment now, and it's the CEO's third business. He's exited the first one. He's into it, stood back from the second and growing a third. And to that end, you have a very good record and a very good relationship with him. That obviously very much feeds into it. And But I suppose fundamentally it comes back to repayment capacity, and that's really what it boils down to. When we're looking at businesses, it's really the ability that has the business, have the capacity that if in terms of accessing debt, that they're in a position to repay it, and that's largely, I suppose, where we make the assessment.
And just in very broad terms, then, say, as an organization might come to you to have those initial conversations, what are the sort of the areas of homework that they need to have done? What's that level of readiness that you like to see so that you can speed that entire process?
Well, I think certainly up-to-date accounts is always a huge factor, because in terms of, I'm not a banker, right? I'm not brought in to be a specific banker, so I kind of support the bankers in the front line. But the team that I work with, we've a technology TMT team, and they would very much be looking at, obviously, the numbers very quickly, the cash flow position. So we're very much looking at up-to-date accounts and get an understanding of kind of where, if there's debtors in terms of our creditors, in terms of that, we want to see where the position is. So in terms of really, we want to assess cash flow. That's fundamentally where we're at. It's assessing cash flow.
Okay. So in terms then of the areas of opportunity that you see, and the sort of sectors and the particular growth areas, like we've all heard instances in terms of insurance and financial services in general, but where are the kind of key areas of opportunity that you see where maybe there's broad acceptance, or there's good use cases that can be applied?
I think it's interesting because actually, Anthony alluded in the presentation about those kind of businesses that are deploying AI, and I think I suppose in my previous life I worked with, I was then CNGL and Adapt, and a couple of the professors there were global peers in personalization, and I've been talking about this for a long time, and I really do see personalization coming in terms of this hyper kind of relevant products that we're going to ultimately be sold. Now, notwithstanding there obviously be ethical, back in terms of where they get the data to get companies are going to present us to. But I do think you're going to see much more personalization in fintech, particularly. I think in real time, because the aggregation of data is giving a huge opportunity for businesses to be able to kind of, those digital first are native, as Dervla alluded to. I mean, it's a big opportunity for them to kind of to streamline and to really to kind of get the kind of propositions early. So I think it's fundamentally back. It all boils down to really, I think, is the customer experience, that an innovation that's really enhancing the customer experience, making it seamless. So I think very much that's feeding very much into payments. Again, the aggregation of data, I think you're going to see a lot of partnerships between payments and kind of companies, be it retail or otherwise, or even financial services, traditional businesses, making it streamlined so that kind of it kind of makes it irresistible at times to be able to complete purchases and to be able to, and that payment data that's behind it makes it very seamless. So I think that's another one. I think just to hit on wealth tech and insurtech, CB Insights presented a report, and it was actually just earlier in the year. In Q1 of 21, wealth tech, the amount of funding globally going into wealth tech in that Q1 of 21 exceeded the entirety of 2020. So that gives you an idea of actually where the money is going in wealth tech. Very much around private and personal finance and investment applications. And it's very much leading in then the kind of, you're seeing the advancement of robo advisors, and you're seeing real time in terms of actually investment kind of data and products as well. So that's a lot of where it's going into the in wealth tech and into the insurtech business. Well, not as much funding. I think up to Q3 it was down by 37% year on year, but at the same token, it's still ahead of the entirety. The end of Q3 we'll see at the end of entirely ahead of the total amount of funding gone in 2020 as well. So both, insurtech and wealth tech are getting quite a bit of funding. But in the insurtech space, you're seeing again analytics come into predictive analytics around in personal insurance. You're seeing a lot of it in relation to cyber risk insurance, and in terms of actually, so they're the kind of things that are actually where the big money is going at the moment. So that gives kind of an indicator really. So I mean, those businesses you can see growth. The big investment follows the kind of the high performers really, Paul.
Right. Okay. Well, listen, I'm conscious of time. We've got just about sort of 10 minutes on the clock, but bear with us, anybody who has a question. So I'd like to invite Anthony, Dervla, and and Brendan back on, and we'll open it up to questions from the floor. So if anybody does have a question, I see there's a question there about the AI Masters. So thank you for providing information on that. And if you're interested, there's resources being posted there. So what I suppose what we've heard collectively this morning from everybody is the fact that there are frameworks there, there are pathways, there are supports, and there's also a broad level of knowledge there in terms of actually trying to translate things in. So maybe I suppose we'll just while people are gathering their thoughts and maybe put some questions together, if we could take it from each of your perspectives, and what do you see as the sort of single biggest challenge, maybe the biggest stumbling block that organizations face? Because again, we've heard so much in terms of the supports. Are there common areas where people stumble, and maybe not just at that pilot stage? So maybe Anthony, do you want to take that one briefly before we go through the rest of the speakers?
I mean, I hate to mention the war, but it's strategy. I mean, the big area is absolutely time and time again, people say strategic positioning of our AI, but advanced technologies in general. Many people just roll their eyes at that and say, good guy, he's not on about the strategy thing again. But it's absolutely critical. Time and time, you look at reports, McKinsey, Gartner, you look at reporting that's done particular to industries as well. And again, it's strategic positioning. Dervla talked about it, the value proposition, interpreting the opportunity for that AI can present to the business, and making sure that that stacks up financially. I mean, can we make a return on investment? Is it good customer experience? Is it going to resonate with our customer base? And evidence-based strategy, making sure that there's data there to back it up, not just finger in the wind. God, I think I like the look at that. My stomach feels good on that one. That type of thing has got to stop. We've got to start looking at strategy, and we've got to start evidence-based assessment and value proposition.
Okay, Dervla, do you want to take that one? Because again, from your very much real world experience in terms of actually delivering a solution, where were the biggest challenges that you experienced maybe, and what would you advise others as they face those themselves?
Well, I mean, I'd agree with Anthony in that the strategy and focus is the most important starting point. We'd also kind of make sure we explicitly add kind of risk profiles and confidence profiles to any opportunities we're evaluating. And it's not to say we'll only do the low risk ones or the ones we've high confidence in, but it'll definitely guide that we have a more balanced kind of portfolio. And also for the high risk, low confidence, we'll be very lean on how we do them. And we'll look for extra insight from externals, because if you go into a high risk, low confidence project unprepared, or you're putting a big team on it and no kind of short-term milestone in place, you can lose a lot of investment and find very late that this is never going to materialize, and that's very costly, especially for a company of our size. And then the other one that I just emphasize again, unfortunately, is the skills piece. It's extremely challenging to grow in this area internally. At the moment, we want to really accelerate the investment we're making in this. We want to double and then triple the team that we have on this. But it's a very challenging market to hire people into. So we're very much into developing our own teams, training them, expanding their skill sets, but also, trying to be very creative in how we attract people to Newswhip. The fact that we're small, the fact that we're using the latest technologies, the fact that you can really have a voice in guiding our strategy on this is the things we have to really shout about, because we're never going to compete with the big US companies in terms of reward or scale. So you have to really kind of play to your strengths, and just even the remote working and the idea that we will work with a lot of partners, that you'll be participating in the community, driving this forward, and that we're solving quite important problems like understanding what the social discourse is on these platforms and helping tackle misinformation and things like that. They're the types of things we have to really emphasize to people when we're recruiting, because it's a very tough market. I mean, even it's great to hear from Brendan that we're top of the list in in terms of AI talent, but we really need to drive that further and further and further, because we know a lot of the big players now are even recruiting from Dublin for teams elsewhere in the States and Europe. So it's incredibly competitive.
Okay, Brendan, do you want to come in on that? Because you did mention that very encouraging stat in terms of per capita, but that still kind of boils down to possibly a relatively small number of people.
Yeah, I think the last statistics were around 120,000 people claim to have AI competence at some level. That means they're able to at least understand how to program Python and use the open source frameworks that are available. We do have a lot of people that are interested in it. We've seen at every level, from the CRTs, from the software engineering, undergraduate degrees, that they're starting to introduce more and more elements of artificial intelligence to this. Our key drive is always to make sure that we've got like a vibrant ecosystem for mobility, and we need to have the skills continuously coming in, making Ireland attractive for people to come in from abroad. Plus also making sure we have the indigenous ecosystem and talent pool coming from the university. So we need to continuously feed back to make sure that we have a pool of people. And the encouraging thing that I've always seen is that we do have people who are both humanitarian headed as well as science headed. So when you're trying to look for a creative person who's agile, we've been very successful in getting people who understand data, who understand AI, but also understand the human story that has to go into the background of that. And hopefully that will be the difference for creating a new company, starting to scale up your existing operations, or else trying to introduce new strategic overviews, because you have to do it. You can't fall behind on AI. It's not an option anymore.
Certainly. Okay. Well, I'll just ask Sarah to pop up the second poll. Just we're just on 9 o'clock now, but we have a very interesting question there as well while people are grappling with the poll. Do you see the need to apply certification mechanisms to ensure AI ethics compliance? So again, with the examples that Anthony highlighted, and we've all heard about the Microsoft chatbot and a few other things that went askew. So who would like to tag him? Maybe Dervla, if you'd like to come in on that one first, because I suppose ethics and verifying information is very much a part of what you do in terms of measuring and managing those news contents.
Yeah, I think you can't ignore that aspect of it. The reputational risks and the real world risks are too high to ignore that. But I think you can still stay a little bit practical. Some of those frameworks Anthony mentioned, they're just very useful and applicable. We don't need to wait for regulation and certifications to come down to be making progress in these places. So that's why we have published a policy on how we use our data. We strive for transparency. So I think if you can take some of the principles of these frameworks that we know are going to be at the heart of the certifications and the regulations, and be kind of designing them in from the day one of your strategies, it'll help you with your readiness to both seize on opportunities then when there's certifications coming, because they can really help differentiate you and attract talent and all of those things, but also then be kind of ready for the risks associated with regulation coming and you're not prepared. And then there's a huge amount of kind of re-engineering things and massive projects like there were with GDPR. So the sooner you have that on your radar and it's a component of your strategy and your change management, the better.
Okay, Brendan, you'd like to comment on that?
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, these regulations, they are coming in, but they have been led predominantly by the scientific community and the industry community. So NSAI and the standards bodies are working together, but it's very clear that the upcoming European AI Act has regulations, and it says what's going to be risk and what needs to have additional measures and compliance checks on it. And it will be then up to each individual country to implement those. We're hoping that the overhead, we do need trails of data for learning and for training, and the industry has already started to move towards that. But it will just be something that hopefully will be more manageable and not something that will just drop on top of us as GDPR did.
Okay, well, I'm just going to share the results then of the poll where we asked how aware people are regarding the EU regulation to be introduced in 2022. So the half of people said that they've heard about it but not familiar with details, and more than a third said not aware at all. So I think that's pretty telling in these circumstances. Anthony, do you want to comment on that maybe from that sort of awareness perspective?
I don't think it's surprising. As these things come down the line and they get nearer to the businesses, they'll tend to react. One thing I will say in terms of certification, there will be a classification system as part of the new regulation based on the what I said, prohibited, high risk, and so on. The EU will also be keeping a catalogue of those systems which it assigns a high risk to. So that catalogue will build up over time. So the idea of certification and classification is absolutely going to become pretty important and central to some businesses, particularly in the high risk category.
Okay, well, maybe just to round off, I'll just go to Paul in terms of that perspective in terms of the risk elements. How do you find awareness around those in terms of the organizations that you're dealing with? Because I suppose after you find that an organization is on a sound financial footing, then the risk factors involved must influence things as well.
Well, it's actually something I actually bring up now, Paul, with companies, in terms of make sure that they're aware of it, because, excuse me, it's part and package of our own risk profile too, that we're actually maintaining the business and, that they're actually aware of what's out there. So, no, there is a lot of the time, to be fair, they'll tell you they're aware of them, but they're actually trying to build product and try and get get sales kind of thing. And they actually have somebody who's, a project or a dedicated person internally that's kind of working through it. But it's a priority, but I wouldn't say for some businesses as much a priority as it probably should be. But as it evolves in terms of the timelines, I think, like as Derva said with GDPR, it just becomes kind of in front of your face that you have to act on it then at that point.
Very good. Okay. Well, I'm conscious of time. We're just a little bit over. So what I'd like to do is maybe go around from individual perspectives and maybe get one piece of advice, say, for an organization that might be exploring these points and looking to go a little bit further. So maybe we'll come to Dervla first, and then Brendan and Paul, and maybe we'll round out with Anthony then. So Dervla, one golden nugget for somebody in the early stages.
I just tap into the community. There's, through Anthony, through NSI, through EI, there's a huge amount of resources. And if you try and just go this alone and learn through, creating scars, it'll be very painful and very slow. There's a lot you can kind of accelerate by tapping into others.
Great. Thank you. Brendan?
Yeah, exactly. Go for it. Try and figure out what is going to be your unique selling point for whatever you're trying to develop. Try and build it, try and scale it, and definitely tap into the wider community. We're all very helpful.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul.
Dervla and Brendan robbed my words. I stole my I suppose I would have said the same. I think the key thing really is network, insofar as, and Anthony had it in his presentation about kind of peer, in terms of reaching out to your peers and stuff and actually getting advice. There are huge supports. I'd work very closely with Enterprise Ireland, and I think things like innovation vouchers and the digitalization voucher with EI, it'll help insofar as getting technical expertise brought into your business. So I would certainly, but again, as everyone else said, reach out to the community. There's great support there.
Okay. Anthony, a final comment then.
Well, I would finish with the point that Dervla made previously, skills. Stay in contact with what we're doing around the skills at scale. It's going to be targeting business leaders as well and helping them on the journey. Attend the webinars. You can see we're getting great insights and information from people who are out there at the coalface. So continue to watch these webinars, continue to stay in touch with what the technology ICT SkillNet is doing around skills. We're here to bring people on that journey.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I think the fact that the audience has bared with us beyond our allotted time, and those questions as well in terms of supports and insights are great. So thank you very much to everybody for joining us this morning. Thank you to Dervla Mullen, Brendan Bonner, Paul Swift, and to Anthony for setting out that presentation. So as Anthony mentioned, please do watch ictskillnet.ie for notice of the upcoming webinars in the series, where we'll be covering all aspects of skills at scale for AI. So thank you very much for your interaction this morning. There's lots of thanks and acknowledgement of the quality of the content this morning in the chat. So thank you everybody for joining us this morning, and thank you to our producer Sarah for handling it all for us. So have a good morning. Hopefully that was useful for you.